I recently read an article by this guy named Jeremy Myers who had a friend die in a hiking accident, and it really shook him up, and so much so that it really redirected the entire course of his life, and he dropped out of engineering school to go to Bible college because he said that he wanted his life to really mean something and because he really wanted to help people. So this is the heart that Jeremy has. And so after Bible college, he went to a small church in a small Montana town. And it was a town that was really not very Christian, and I believe this was really the only authentic, gospel witness in this community. And so he felt just a very heavy burden for these folks, and he poured himself into this little community and into this little church, and so much so that he was kind of a self-admitted workaholic, didn't spend a lot of time at home just because he was working so hard. 3.5 years into the work, he was fired because some of the primary tithers in the church said that they didn't like the direction he was taking the church, which is really kind of code for they were losing control. And so Jeremy had another short stint in another Montana church before deciding what he really needed was some more training. And so he left for Texas to go to seminary, and while in seminary he needed to support his family, and he found what he thought was his dream job. And he began working full-time for a Christian publisher while going to school full-time. And as you can imagine, with a schedule like that, again, he wasn't able to spend a lot of time at home with his wife and children. About a week before graduation, he was fired from his job at the Christian publisher for a very honest and heartfelt blog post that many interpreted, or some interpreted, certainly the leadership at the Christian publisher where he worked, as being religiously incorrect. And everything just kind of spiraled down from there. And here's an excerpt from the article that I read, because it was an article about him trying to pick himself up and put his life together. And he writes, "I sunk into depression. My faith shattered. Everything I had worked for and hoped for lay in pieces at my feet. I lost my dream job, and almost all of my Christian friends abandoned me. After applying for nearly 60 different jobs, the only job I could get was as a carpet cleaner. I also had pretty much destroyed my wife and 3 daughters by ignoring them for most of my time as a pastor and all of my time as a seminary student. It seemed to me that by almost every standard, my life was a complete failure." I've heard it said that when you are young, you are filled with hopes and dreams and aspirations, and then you get old and you are filled with regrets and unrealized expectations and unfulfilled dreams. And I know it's a cynical view of the world, but it's certainly how a lot of people feel. It's pretty much the driver behind the midlife crisis phenomenon. Man, my life is more than half over, and what do I have to show for it? Things certainly haven't turned out the way I expected. I haven't accomplished what I set out to accomplish. My life does not look like what I thought that it would look like. My relationships do not look like what I thought my relationships would look like. I'm not fulfilled, I'm not happy, I'm not content, and I have this gnawing restlessness in my bones that there should be something more. And as we get older, we learn to live with our failures and our regrets, and ultimately we take them to our graves. And it has also been said, it is not without reason that cemeteries are the wealthiest places on earth. For they are filled with millions of unwritten books, unsung songs, and unfulfilled dreams. I recently read an article that listed the top 7 regrets of people that are dying. Here they are in no particular order. Number 1, I wish I had lived my own life rather than how society taught me to live. Number 2, I wish I had discovered my purpose earlier. Number 3, I wish I had taken more risks. Number 4, I wish I had taken better care of myself. Number 5, I wish I'd allowed myself to love. Number 6, I wish I had touched more lives and inspired more people. And number 7, I wish I had been a better partner or parent. And all of this revolves around our mortality. I wish I just had more time. And then I could really get my act together. I could really do things right then. But we know that's not how it works. We have this, in reality, this very small window to do and be what it is that we want to do and to be. And the entire time, the clock is ticking. Tick, tock, tick, tock. And then one day, after we've just been living life, trying to make it, trying to survive, trying to make the mortgage payment, trying to get, the kids through school, just trying to do these things, we wake up and we're 40, or we're 50, or we're 70. And there's this sense that where did it all go? And that gnawing restlessness is still there. When am I going to do something that matters? Does my life matter? And it's kind of like we're that football team down 21 points in the fourth quarter. There's this urgency to do something, but we're running out of options. And the crisis of death really doesn't have as much to do with death itself as it does with the idea that we are out of time. That we are writing the last page of a book. The last paragraph of a book. And all that has been written and all that ever will be written has now been written. And was it good? Was it worth writing? Was it worth living? And into this place, God speaks. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I believe the most intelligent and well-read person that I have ever known was a writer that I had the privilege of leading to the Lord by the name of Mike New. And Mike was classically trained and could, if not was fluent in several languages, could certainly read and comprehend several languages. And I remember sharing Christ with Mike and witnessing to him, and he would always break out a pocket New Testament, a pocket Greek New Testament, and follow along to make sure that I was getting everything right. And Mike knew more about philosophy than anybody I'd ever met. He was extremely knowledgeable about history and sociology and psychology, and he seemed to genuinely understand and just have a pulse on the things that thinking people we're interested in. And he said something to me one time, and I'll never forget it. He said, it really perplexes me. It puzzles me why Christians don't talk about death more. Because it really is the great existential question of our being, the great existential question of our souls. And everybody has to deal with it, and we're all terrified. Certainly more so than about other things, that we fear and that we think about. And Christians have the answer. Christians have the hope for death. And this is what's happening here now as we begin to progress in Psalm 23. It begins to speak to these kinds of questions in a way that genuinely touches our souls. And we've been talking about the psalm and breaking down the psalm about how we can find peace and contentment and well-being by following the Lord. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want, because He cares for us. He satisfies our souls. He provides, the needs for our souls, and that under His care, we are okay. He can show us a life worth living. And He does so in the most beautiful and poetic of ways. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. He guides me towards, goodness and provision and abundance and life. And in so many ways, the psalm ascends to lay bare our humanity and the crisis of our mortality and all of those deep, dark fears that dwell deep down in our souls, and He calms them. And they just blow away like chaff on the wind. And then the psalm turns. It transitions. It ascends to another place, an even higher place, a place of even greater existential significance, where he says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. It's one of the most powerful phrases, one of the most powerful lines in all of Scripture. And we have to remember here that David is playing on his expertise and his experience as a shepherd, and he knows that in order to bring the sheep to the green pastures, in order to lead them to the still waters, that sometimes they must tread dangerous paths, because sometimes these are out-of-the-way places. And that some of the valleys through which he must lead them are not entirely safe. Sometimes the paths are steep or uneven or covered in scree. And sometimes there are greater dangers, the viper and the mountain lion and the bear. And the sheep do not like walking these paths. And the sheep grow anxious and skittish, and sheep have been known to work themselves up and become extremely nervous because they just know that something is lurking, something is there, something's about to happen, and any little thing, just a rock tumbling down the hill, will just cause them to bolt and just blindly run, perhaps and probably likely even into greater danger. Especially in the high places where they can go over a cliff, or they can run into a place where there are predators and things like that. And one of the primary duties of the shepherd was to calm and reassure the sheep. And when that collective anxiousness began to swell in the flock, the shepherd can sense that. You can sense from the twitching and the body language of the sheep that they're not entirely comfortable. And so he wants to reassure them that he is there. That he's got it under control. That he knows where he's going. That he is going to keep them safe. And David, in all likelihood, did this with his rod or staff. And he probably did this by tapping on the ground when they were going through such places. And you've probably seen images even today in other parts of the world where there still are shepherds, these shepherds even today, walking along with their flocks with a long rod or staff, and they're tapping on the ground as they walk. And as they do, the sheep seem to follow their lead and gather in around the shepherd because for some reason they have learned to read these taps. And so if a sheep begins to kind of veer off to the side, especially in some dangerous paths, there's a way that the shepherd taps on the other side of the sheep, and the sheep, hears that, and it registers with the sheep, and then he just begins to veer back over. I've kind of gotten off track a little bit. And if a sheep is maybe crowded out and heading it away and he's not responding to the taps, well, then the shepherd reaches out with the rod and he nudges the sheep and just kind of pushes the sheep back in where it needs to go. And if a sheep gets completely disoriented, especially if they're treading a strange path, not some place where they've been a lot, sheep are not the smartest animals in the animal kingdom, And so sometimes they'll just go off and he'll turn that staff around and he'll use the crook and he'll pull that sheep back to where it needs to go and get it oriented right. And this would all bring great comfort to the sheep. Because again, they knew that the shepherd was there, that he knew what he is doing. He knows where he's going. He's even protecting them. Because when danger comes, again, as I spoke about during the communion time, the shepherd would then place himself between the sheep and the danger, and he would take that staff out there and he would use it to drive off the viper. He would use it to drive off the mountain lion. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And so the sheep found security and safety in the shepherd. But it's here where the analogy begins to jump the tracks a little bit. And where the poetic imagery of the psalm begins to transcend into something else entirely. And we see that transition is complete by the next verse where he says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, because I don't care how content and well-groomed your sheep are, they do not eat from tables. And so something else is happening here. And there's a new image that the shepherd analogy may not exactly account for. The valley of the shadow of death. Because he's talking about something far deeper and far darker than slipping on a rock or driving off a snake. The valley of the shadow of death is something ominous and terrible. And it's simply not death. It's not the valley of death. It's the valley of the shadow of death. And does death not cast a long shadow over our lives? And is that shadow in many ways not our mortality? And all of the questions and the issues and the anxiety that mortality implies in our lives. And we must all walk this road from time to time. We all walk in the valley of the shadow of death. we think to ourselves, I don't have much time. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Am I okay? Am I doing good? Is my life rich and bountiful? Does my life matter? Do I have meaning? Tick, tock, tick, tock. Oh my goodness, I can't believe how time is just flying by. I can't believe we're in this stage of our life already. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Oh my goodness, it seems like it's almost gone. There's only a few more jelly beans in the jar. Tick, tock, tick, tock. And then one day, I can't believe it, it's here. And I'm on the doorstep. And random images from my childhood, the tending of a skin knee, the exchange of rings, the retirement watch, accomplishments, regrets, friends, family, children, all begin to swirl together to form the totality of my life. And was it good? And was it worth living? And what happens now because I am afraid? And it is here and it is in this place that we know, or when we know, that we have a good shepherd. And like David shepherded his sheep, and as he led his sheep, we have a shepherd that can lead us safely to the other side. And death and all her minions, regret and fear and brokenness, try to assail us, but we are under the charge of the shepherd. And he drives them off and leads us to pastures of goodness and abundance and life. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. John 10:11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. 1 Peter 5:4, and when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive a crown of glory that will never fade away. Revelation 7:17, for the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And so we see from these passages that the Good Shepherd overcomes not only death, but the shadow of death. The existential weight of our mortality upon our lives, and He dries our tears and leads us to living water. And this is a picture of perfect peace, perfect contentment, and perfect well-being. And this is the sentiment that's expressed in the rest of the psalm as we read on. We read, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And he's talking about present tense. We look at the valley of the shadow of death, and we always want to put that in future tense. And I think in many ways, it's present tense. It's learning to live in the shadow of death, under the weight of our mortality. And it still is talking about present tense here as he's talking about these enemies. And he's currently preparing a table before us in the presence of our enemies, or of my enemies now. And again, we have to remember the thrust of the psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And how following the Lord leads us to peace and contentment and well-being. And the question is, well, what are the enemies of my soul? What are the enemies to this peace and this contentment? And are they not the same enemies that dwell in the valley of the shadow of death? Regret, brokenness, fear, guilt, shame, anxiety, all of the byproducts of our humanity and our mortality. And notice something very interesting here in this text that's going on, and it is that he does not drive them away. For they are present as long as we are present in this world. For as long as we are in this world, we will walk in the valley of the shadow of death. And our mortality hangs over us like a cloud tethered to our souls. But notice something else. While he may not drive the enemies away, they may be ever present on the periphery of our lives and trying to gain entrance into our hearts. But notice also that he renders them mute and helpless as he showers his abundance upon us in their very presence. Almost as if to mock them. Almost as if to demonstrate how small and powerless they really are. What can possibly happen to me? Death has no power over me. And all of those things that we so long for in life, all of those things that our souls crave, that happiness, that contentment, that joy, that peace, that sense of meaning and purpose and significance and accomplishment, all of those things now are no longer a hope or a dream. They're no longer this ethereal mist that happens on the fringes of hope and the fringes of our lives. And yes, maybe this is so. Maybe one day this will happen. It is now something that is an eternal reality. It is something that will happen, and we are blessed beyond measure, for the table of the Lord is a table of liberality and generosity. And the psalm then goes on to describe how that works and what that is. He says, "You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows." And so this isn't just a table. We're not just sitting at the table. There's more going on here at the table. There's more blessing here than we even begin to realize. A couple of weeks ago, as we were kind of digging into the psalm, I mentioned how the shepherds would pour oil on the heads of the sheep to rid them of parasites and insects. And this was just a wonderful picture of how the psalmist cares for the sheep. And I don't believe actually that's what's going on here in this case and in this picture. Because how could that possibly be described as an anointing? There's that word anointing that is a special word. Furthermore, as we've already demonstrated, David has transitioned the psalm and has ascended the psalm beyond the shepherding metaphor. And David's readers, or those who would be singing this psalm, because they were meant to be sung in worship context, but those who would be familiar with this psalm would understand it from their context. And what David is talking about is a joyous celebration, a joyous feast or a banquet. And at banquets back in that day and time, it was customary in a huge celebration like a wedding or a birthday or an anniversary, or, like, I guess those are the equivalents today, but, those big celebrations, it was customary for the host to single out a guest of honor by pouring or anointing their heads with scented or perfumed oil. And that would signify that this person was special and highly favored. And there was no higher honor or offer of hospitality or generosity that any guest could possibly receive. And when David says, "You anoint my head with oil," he is making a statement about the honor and the favor that the Lord has towards his sheep. One scholar writes, "Thus Yahweh lays a table as his guest looks on, and right in front of his persecutors, no less, who are quite unable to harm him or even mar the joy of the meal because of the presence of such a host." The point is the assertion of God's power and full hospitality. The host then singles out the guest as honored by pouring scented oil on his head. The poet's joy at the thought is boundless. He is nearly overcome by it, and he can only say, "My cup has run over." Folks, the provision of the shepherd in our lives is beyond compare. And we are highly honored and highly favored. And this is how he demonstrates how dear and special we are to him. This is how he demonstrates how much he loves us and how much he cares for us. And then as we read on, we see there is another intent that David has. And again, he is euphoric at this point. Every line, the psalm has ascended to some greater provision, some greater providence, some greater goodness, addressing deeper and deeper levels of existential need, deeper and deeper levels into our souls. And now he gets to another point where he says, "Look, you don't understand the half of it. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Life under the shepherd is good. And it's all made possible by his love and grace and mercy. Yet to those who follow the shepherd, this goodness is not temporary. This goodness is eternal. In other words, death is not the end. Death is only a time of transition. And so, as the days of our lives are ticking away, tick tock, they are not counting down to the end. They are counting up to the beginning. Tick tock, tick tock. They are counting up to a time when the Lord himself, the good shepherd of our souls, will lead us to a place of eternal abundance and blessing and goodness and life. And all of those things that eluded us in life, all of those things that seem to weigh so heavy on our souls, all of those things that just seem to crush us and drive us back into our humanity and drive us back into the valley of the shadow of death, and that cause our mortality to hang so heavy upon us, all of the peace and the contentment and the goodness and the well-being and all those things that we desired in life and maybe experienced in part, then we will experience in full because of the endless reservoirs of his grace. And at that time, there will be no more fear. No more seeking, because we will have found. No more striving, because we will know perfect peace. No more hunger, for we shall be satisfied. No more regrets. No more disappointments, no more emptiness, no more desperation, no more loneliness, and finally, no more tears. And in that moment, we will know that we are okay. That my life is good and rich because I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.